I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll cover a Gator Hall of Famer is coming home. The Cajuns are raging over Billy Napier raiding his old roster and staff. College football playoff recap with a look ahead to the title game on Monday night. And we'll finish the show by discussing the bowl opt-out situation. It's been much discussed. Kirk Herbstreit had some comments on College Game Day. Will wrote an article in response to it. So we'll go over that for $1. Will, how was New Year, man?
Not too bad. It was nice to have a little bit of time off of work. Not really a whole lot of time to relax because football's always going on. But, Florida season was over, so it was a little bit relaxing to watch these games. And other than the Michigan-Georgia game where I definitely had a rooting interest, just about every Gator except for one maybe was interested in Georgia losing that game to Michigan. And unfortunately, we get an SEC rematch, I guess, fortunately for the conference, but unfortunately for anybody who wanted to see Georgia go down. So we got one more shot. And, I guess from the standpoint of, narratives, right? Either Kirby's going to slay the beast or he's going to go back with his tail between his legs one more year and everybody's going to chant 1980. So should be fun next Monday night, end of the season. So it's a little bit depressing, but fun to have those playoff games during the holidays for sure.
Well, it's their own fault that Alabama's there. So the Alabama Dragon you can't get away from it, Georgia. You got to slay it. You don't get an easy out for a title. All right, let's jump into two bits here. We'll talk about the return of Mike Peterson to the University of Florida. Mike Pete, linebacker on that national championship team, Gainesville, Florida native. Gator great. He's in the UF Athletic Hall of Fame. He was the outside linebackers coach and defensive ends coach at South Carolina for the past 3 years. Will, as a senior in 1998, he served as the team captain, earned first-team All-ACC and All-American honors, and was selected as the Gators' most valuable player by his teammates. Second-round pick to the Colts. And, for those of you from the North Florida area from Duval, you'll remember him as one of the few positive free agency acquisitions made by my Jacksonville Jaguars, which hashtag fire Balky, going to throw that in there real quick. Key part to a couple of those Jaguar playoff teams under Jack Del Rio, though. Solid linebacker. Wrapped up his career in Atlanta with, I believe that was when Mike Smith was coaching the Falcons, so reunited with Mike Smith there. During his NFL career, logged 883 tackles in 196 games, 21 and a half sacks, 19 interceptions. This was a guy that could do it all, fly around on the field. Returned to Florida, finished his degree in 2013, and ended up serving as a strength and conditioning coach in the final years of Muschamp from 2013 to 2015. He was an undergrad one of those years, I believe. And then since 2016, he's been the outside linebackers coach and working with the defensive ends as well up at South Carolina. Will, big time target for Billy Napier to bring in here, and just to make a lot of folks around Gainesville happy seeing Mike Peterson back with the Gators.
Yeah, I think for a few reasons. One is that Florida's linebacker play has been so bad the last few years that having a guy in there with that sort of pedigree is exciting to everybody. You think of him as sort of a solid professional football player, but he was second team All-Pro in 2005. So he was amongst the best 6 linebackers in the NFL there in 2005 when he was great.
Yeah.
So, it's a solid career, but there were some highs there that were pretty significant, not just at Florida, but also once he got into the pros. And then the other thing is, he comes to Florida, gets his degree, and in 14 and 15 ends up being the strength and conditioning coach, or 13, 14, and 15. And so he spanned the Muschamp era, right? Muschamp leaves and Peterson gets retained. And then once Muschamp gets the job at South Carolina, he goes right out and hires Mike Peterson to come in and be his outside linebackers coach. And then even when Shane Beamer takes over, he stays as a linebackers coach there at South Carolina. So there's a lot to be said for that when a new staff comes in, that they say, this is a guy we want to keep. And I think a big part of that is relationships with players. A big part of that is, being a presence that these guys look up to and a presence that these guys want to be around. And so when you think about the relationships that Napier's trying to build within the program, and you think about where he needs to see improvement on the field, I'm not sure that you're going to get a better combination than a guy like Mike Peterson, who clearly, has a reputation as somebody that players really like to be around, but also has the pedigree that they're going to have to listen when he tells them to do things that maybe aren't the easiest thing in the world to do.
Will, what can you tell me about how Mike Peterson's developed linebackers to this point in his career? Young coach still, but obviously with the type of pedigree, his impeccable pedigree with being as great of a player as he was, You give a guy like that benefit of the doubt, a young coach in his coaching career, the benefit of the doubt, because the guy knows what he's talking about. But how has he developed players at South Carolina, and what can you say about his time at Florida?
Well, I mean, that's one of those things that's a little bit difficult to answer just because Will Muschamp is the guy who's the defensive coordinator when he's there. And certainly that has something to do with it, right? Like you can't necessarily just ignore the fact that Muschamp is the guy who's the defensive coordinator for those defenses. What I will say is that Florida hasn't had linebackers who've flown around like him since he left, right? I mean, you think about the guys who were there in 13, 14, and 15 at the linebacker position. I know he's the strength and conditioning coach, but if you think that he wasn't out there teaching guys things that needed to be taught at that linebacker position, I think crazy. I would say that it's a little bit of a mixed bag when you look at it both from a recruiting perspective and from the guys on the field at South Carolina. It's not something where I just immediately something pops into my head and says, hey, these are the linebackers that, bam, bam, bam. These are the guys who come off the South Carolina space. But what I would say is that linebacker has not been an issue at South Carolina. Offense has been the issue at South Carolina, just like it was for Will Muschamp under, at Florida as well. And so, again, I think the retention of him says a lot for the staffs. And I think, there were some questions when Billy Napier let Kewan Ratliff go in terms of, are there going to be connections to the program? And so I think just as important as the outside linebacker part of the coaching designation is being that alumni liaison and making sure that the players, the former players, and all the people associated with the program feel comfortable with the program, have a connection, and are able to make sure that they're still plugged in if they want to be.
Great points all the way around. Let's move on to 4 bits here. Let's talk about it, Will. Raging Cajuns, they I'll tell you what, this fan base from Louisiana, they have been extremely gracious about Billy Napier's exit. We've talked about it a whole bunch about the connection he clearly had, the culture they called out there. And it's there's starting to be a little tension, I would say maybe the tension's already well into having some tension, maybe not starting to is a little light way to put it, but it turns out when you leave one place and you end up raiding the roster for some solid players, and you go raid the department for some of the key personnel, and then you go grab a couple coaches, maybe that place won't be so happy for you anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, you got to kind of expect that some people are going to follow him out the door. And, it's one of those things where Twitter is not real life. And I do think that we need to remember that Twitter is not real life. And so when people get upset on Twitter, go look at some of the more energetic folks for Gator Twitter. And that's not necessarily a reflection in real life either. Look, the only guy who's committed from Louisiana at this point is Cameron Waits. And I look at that and I'm actually questioning giving that guy a scholarship, not because he doesn't have a lot of potential, but there's not any film on him because he hasn't played football since like 8th grade. And, it was a project at Louisiana for Napier to bring him in. And so
just to be clear, this is a 6'8", 372-pound offensive tackle. That's why he's getting the project label. When you're 6'8", you'll get some patience, I believe.
Well, and who played an awful lot of basketball, right? So from a feet perspective and being able to move and all that sort of stuff, look, I think he maybe will prove me wrong and be the best, guard or tackle that you can imagine. But I think it's hard to imagine that he's going to be an immediate contributor this year. The good news is he's got 3 or 4 years left. But I guess my point is that this isn't as though Billy Napier went in and the first transfer out of Louisiana was some 4-star kid who's the highest ranked guy he's ever brought into the Louisiana program. And, hey, I'm going to go raid those people. Now, you've had other guys from Louisiana enter the transfer portal, like Osiris Torrance and Mekhi Garner and Montrell Johnson. And those guys haven't committed yet. I think there's a supposition that those guys are all going to end up at Florida. But maybe that's not true, right? I mean, maybe Torrance decides to go someplace else. I hope not, because he's the one that I want. But, you look at Mekhi Gardner, 15 passes.
Yeah, 6'5", 330-pound interior offensive lineman, Osiris Torrance.
Well, beyond that, a pro football focus All-American in 2021. He's been all Sun Belt the last 2 seasons. He's got real NFL chops, and that guy's going to play in the league. And so if you have an opportunity to get a year or maybe even 2 of a guy like Osiris Torrance, I guess just 1 because he's played for 3. He came in and played as a true freshman. So you get 1 year out of Osiris Torrance. but you need it because the offensive line in Gainesville has been rough the last few years. And then you think about the guys they're losing in Gene DeLance and Stuart Reese, and they're going to need a guard there on the right hand side, especially to be able to make a difference. Guys like Mekhi Garner, he's had 15 passes defense the last 2 years, 3 interceptions. He's cornerback. He was also all Sun Belt this year, so I mean a very good player. But Florida's pretty strong at the corner position. And then Montrell Johnson, 5'11", 200 pounds, 5.2 yards per rush last season as a true freshman. Again, I think Florida's pretty strong at the running back position. So this is one of those where I think if Napier really sees potential in one of these guys in Garner and Johnson, maybe he goes out and gets them. But I don't know that it's a sure thing that these guys all end up committing to Billy Napier at Florida. I mean, if you think about it, I don't think Caleb Williams is transferring from Oklahoma, and the supposition is that he go out to USC. But right now, the rumors say it may be Georgia, and I think that's one of the things that we need to take into account here. Is it's not necessarily Napier raiding Louisiana; it's Napier leaving, and Napier is the recruiter. At least that's the hope, right? Is we hope that Napier is an outstanding recruiter. And so when Napier leaves, the assistant coaches who stay behind and the relationships that those guys have built, it doesn't look like it's strong enough for everybody to stay. And certainly with all the change going on in the program, those guys are going to look elsewhere. And it's enticing for everybody in college football at this point that if you're playing at a Sun Belt conference level program and you become all Sun Belt, that you're essentially the minor leagues for the big boys. So, a guy like Osiris Torrance might be somebody that Nick Saban wants. Might be somebody Kirby Smart wants. Might be somebody that, Ryan Day wants up at Ohio State. And if you get to put the scarlet and what is it? Scarlet and silver. What is it for Ohio State?
Scarlet and gray.
Scarlet and gray. Yeah, it's not gray. It's silver. But anyway, if you get to put the scarlet and gray on for Ohio State, I mean, that's sort of what every kid grows up dreaming about. Right. So I guess I sort of look at it and say, this is kind of we're reaping what we've sown in terms of having a one-time no penalty transfer and all of these coaches moving around. And maybe these guys end up at Florida, maybe they don't. But look, I'd be mad too if I was at Louisiana because I know my team's not going to be as good next year.
Right.
But my team wasn't going to be as good next year anyway when Napier left and then took a bunch of the staff and all that sort of stuff. But that's what happens, right? College football is turnover all the time. And, the reality is Louisiana wasn't winning a national championship anyway. So it's one of those things where it's time to rebuild. You've got your head coach and we'll sort of go from there.
Free agency is a real thing now, folks. College football, it's a real thing. And we're going to have to get used to it. But we're also in Wild West times. There's not a lot of rules attached to it yet. I think we're still it'll probably look a little different 10 years from now. But right now it's total craziness. Garner targeted 34 times all season, in 538 defensive snaps at the cornerback position. So that's a pretty solid prospect right there. People are staying away from him. And Montrell Johnson Jr., the running back for Louisiana, 838 yards and 12 touchdowns this season. So definitely some real talent leaving that Louisiana team. And even if they don't come to Florida, again, similar to the Caleb Williams situation, when your coach leaves, you're going to look for opportunities elsewhere. I think that for a long time, it's funny to me, for a long time, people have lamented the inability for players to move, even though coaches get to move, and now it's happening and you still have complaining. It's interesting how that works. So I understand some of the frustration from the Louisiana perspective. And hey, look, it's happening at Oklahoma. That means it can happen at Florida. You see a guy like Caleb Williams who come in, you're expecting him for three to 4 years of great football, and he's walking out the door to the highest bidder. That's a tough pill to swallow right now. It's tough to get used to in college football, but that's what it is. So Louisiana fans, your problems aren't unique. It's going on across the sport at the moment. Will, let's move on to 6 bits, talk about the college football playoff. Bama, Cincinnati. Man, I really thought Desmond Ridder would provide a little bit of fireworks in this one. I did not think that Bama would have the ability to shut down Cincinnati to the degree at which they did. But just up front, you saw the first drive. I mean, what did Bama? Did they throw? Did they throw like one pass in 12 plays or something like that? They just ran it down their throat, and then defensively, the Bama defensive front just kept the pressure on all day long. Cincinnati can only manage 2 field goals. Great accomplishment by the Bearcats to get there, but thanks for coming. See you later.
And well, it's
Roll
funny.
Tide into the finals.
I saw Josh Pate over at Late Kick Josh. He had a long discussion point about what happens if you expand the playoff, and basically he said you're going to get 3 or 4 SEC teams
right
in the championship is what you're going to do if you do that. I'm not sure you can argue that after seeing this. Now, obviously, Georgia and Alabama were the class of the SEC this year. I'm not sure Texas A&M or some of those other teams were or Ole Miss, especially with Corral getting injured, would have been good enough to make the finale. But I don't know, right? I mean, I think Ole Miss would have been able to hang with Cincinnati. It would have been able to hang with Michigan. And I mean, geez, this was a butt whipping. 301 rushing yards for Alabama to 74 for Cincinnati. Cincinnati only had 2 real drives, and one of them was sort of the opener. And it was funny. It was, I think, 10-6, and then Alabama went in to make it 17-6. And I was like, this feels an awful lot like that Florida Alabama game earlier this year in terms of just sort of, Cincinnati had an opportunity to punch the ball in there late in the first on their first drive in the first quarter, wasn't able to do it, decided to settle for a field goal. And you don't beat Alabama with field goals when you're an underdog. And look, I get it. It's 4th and goal and you're at like the 6 or 7 yard line, but the reality is you got to play calls. You got to make play calls there. Like you're going to be going for it on 4th down, because at the end of the day, that's what's necessary. And, Bryce Young didn't even play very well. 28 passes for 181 yards, 6.5 yards per pass, had an interception when they were ahead that really could have turned the tide. But instead Alabama shut down Cincinnati and even drove them backwards, and then went down, after they got the punt back, then Alabama went down and scored again. So it's funny. This was one of those where the score, you look at 27-6. All right. That's not too bad. Cincinnati kind of acquitted them well. Anybody who watched that game, they had no chance. Just
close. No,
not even.
I mean, how many passes were batted down? Ritter's pretty tall guy. He's at least 6'3", right? I mean, he sits there. I can't believe how badly they were dominated up front. I thought they're gonna handle themselves a little better based on what I'd seen from Cincinnati the rest of the season. And Bama, they've had some okay games defensively, but defense has been the spot where you feel like, hey, they can be vulnerable there sometimes. I mean, they gave up 41 points in a loss to A&M. You figured Cincinnati would come in. Certainly, Ritter's going to test them more than Stetson Bennett did in Atlanta. Nope, not at all. Shut down completely. Cincinnati. Where if this stays at 4 for a while, which I think this is pretty irrelevant, because I think we're expanding to 12, whether you want it or not, it's coming. So you want to see another G5 team in this? I feel like I'm a strong supporter of the fact that Cincinnati deserved their shot this year, but man, a whole lot had to go right for the Bearcats to even get in. The Notre Dame on the schedule, that Notre Dame happened to go 11-1, and that's their one loss. That looked good for Cincinnati. That's a complete fluke on the schedule. That wasn't like planned out just before the year in hopes of creating a playoff run. But even if you look on the last day of the season, if Oklahoma State ends up beating Baylor, would they miss the pylon by about 6 inches on the last play there? If Oklahoma State beats Baylor, does Cincy make the playoff? I don't know. So a lot had to go right for them to even get there. That being said, if UCF or Cincinnati or another one of these schools goes undefeated, Boise State next year, do you want to see another G5 back in the playoff?
I'm okay with it in the situation we had this year, which is you got a bunch of 1-loss teams, and how do you decipher it? And then you've got an undefeated group of 5 team that has beaten someone who's significant, right? Now, is that things falling right? Yeah, in some ways it is. I mean, a few years ago, Alabama opened up with Florida State, and that seemed like a really big win. And then at the end of the year, Florida State, I think, was like 6-6 or something like that.
That's when the wheels came off, I believe, for Jimbo.
But I mean, but again, you sort of look at that and say, okay, well, Alabama tried to schedule. So do we reward them for trying to schedule? I don't think it's going to be good enough, right? And what that probably means is that these group of 5 teams are going to need to schedule those 2-1s. They're going to need to make sure they have 2 or 3 of those on their schedule every year in order to get into this sort of situation. And it's funny with the UCF situation. I wrote an article, probably would have been 2018, 2019 at this point, where it looked at the average FPI of their opponents, and they played something like 5 or 6 teams with an FPI over 100. And so you start thinking about the number of essentially bye weeks that a team like UCF has over the course of the year. And I don't think anybody doubts that these teams, when they absolutely hit on all cylinders, can compete with most of the teams in the country. The issue is that when you have to hit on all cylinders every week in a conference like the SEC, then you get clipped. And when you play Alabama and Georgia and LSU and Kentucky and, and then you have your non-conference games and say a Florida State and that's, or next year, like Florida's going to have Utah, you put all that on a schedule and it's just a much more difficult ask. And so if a group of 5 team has the exact same record as a Power 5 team, Power 5 team should always go. And that's just the reality. Now, Florida State used to have Bobby Bowden built up that program by basically saying anybody, anywhere, right? Anytime, anybody, anytime, anywhere. And he would have taken a 2-for-1 and he would have gone out there and done it. And he would have said, look, we're going to have our 5 cupcake games at home that we're going to make our money on. And then we're going to go out and we're going to make a reputation by going out and playing all these tough guys on the road. Like you said, these things are all scheduled 5, 6, 7 years out. So it's not as though you can't get on these folks' schedules. But I mean, like a Michigan State 2-for-1 or even an Indiana 2-for-1, like building up your resume with teams, and you're going to have to get lucky, right? The Notre Dame 2-for-1 is lucky, except that Notre Dame's always overrated. So, play Notre Dame. And even if they have a bad year, they're probably going 8-4. So I think there's an opportunity for these Power 5 teams to get in. I'm not mad that the Power 5 team was in there. I think if you had Ohio State in there, I think if you had Oregon State in there, I think if you had, any of those other teams that were sort of hanging out there in the 5, 6, 7, 8 range, I think Alabama just destroys them. And that's the reality, is that at this point, the SEC is the king. And there's a reason why there's 2 SEC teams playing in the national championship. And there's a reason why anybody who wins the SEC championship is automatically in the playoff. There's a reason why even when you lose the SEC championship, they still let you in the playoff and you're still favored to win it. So, the reality is that the SEC is the big dog right now, and it's not getting any closer. And you can expand it to 12 teams. You can keep it at 4. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I think this is the 3rd time we've had 2 SEC teams playing for the national championship. The 2nd time it's these 2 teams. And like I said, hopefully we have the same result as the last time.
The first time created the need for the playoff, right? To Josh
Payne's
point, right?
Supposedly. I mean,
LSU back in the Sugar Bowl. That's why the whole playoff was formed in the first place.
It's funny. Everybody was complaining about the blowouts after the Michigan game, and the only thing I could think of is that there's only one way to fix this, and the way to fix it is to restrict spending on recruiting. That you can see a clear connection with recruiting dollars and recruiting success. And if you restrict, and you look at wins overall, and once you get, I think Georgia spent something like $3.2 million on recruiting either a year or 2 years ago, and Florida was sitting there like 1.5, 1.6. And the teams in the 1.5, 1.6 range do better than the teams in like the $1 million range from a recruiting perspective, but it's not that much better. It's not until you get up over that certain dollar amount where it really sort of becomes insurmountable. So the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Clemsons of the world all sit up there. The only big spender in recruiting who isn't very good is Florida State. And, that's a different story altogether, but that's the way you fix this. If you really want more parity in college football, and I don't know if people want more parity in college football. I love watching the SEC.
There's never been parity. That's a funny discussion to me too, because there's never been parity in college football. At any point in history in college football, there's about 6 to 8 dominant teams for a stretch, and maybe like the bottom 4 or 5 rotate in and out every few years. But there's usually 3 teams that are in the top 5 pretty regularly for at least a half a decade type of run. Maybe you have the odd situation where, you had a Miami dynasty last over a decade. You had FSU go for a long time. There's some rarities there. Alabama, what they're doing right now is unbelievable. Most runs look like something like Florida did with Urban Meyer, or even with Spurrier. At the end of the day, as great as the Spurrier run was, that was a 10-year run. 11 years he was at Florida. So, and even a couple of those years, you weren't necessarily in the national championship hunt. You had a couple of losses on the season, a couple of those years. So the norm is about a 3 to 5 year stretch of having a shot at titles. And what Bama's doing right now is absolutely mind-boggling, Will. But I'm a big group of 5 defender. I like the fact that Cincinnati got a shot. They did not acquit themselves well. So the people that want to scoff at the Cincinnatis of the world, you win this round of the argument. Don't have much to defend on that one. But we'll move on to Michigan and Georgia here, where did Michigan acquit themselves as well as Cincinnati? I'm not sure. Michigan came into this game, Will. They finally get over the Ohio State hump. They locked in for the Big Ten title game, crushed Iowa. And I was really excited to watch this game. Michigan's power running game against that Georgia front, I thought it was going to be interesting. We did talk about it. We did a playoff preview last week. We were joking. We really, the predictions were not solid on that episode. So feel free to skip that episode if you like. But I did, one concern I did have with Michigan is they don't have, like, Alabama did not really challenge Georgia head on with the run. They went and they passed the ball and they put the ball in Bryce Young's hand. I didn't know if Michigan had the downfield capabilities that Alabama possessed. And I thought that could be a problem potentially in the game. And it ended up being a huge problem because Michigan could not do anything downfield. And the running game got pretty swallowed up by that Georgia defense. And man, Georgia, they wiped the slate clean in terms of the memory of the SEC title game in Atlanta. And they looked as dominant as they've been all year. And the game against Bama is almost looking like a fluke, Will.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that you sort of see that when you look at expected points added and those sorts of all the advanced stats. Georgia just dominated everybody this year except Alabama, where they got completely dominated, especially in the second, third, and fourth quarter. This again was another domination. It was 27-3 after the second quarter, though. You know, you had the long bomb at the end of the second quarter where it looked like the defensive back either didn't know where the ball was or just kind of quit. And, you know, so that's 7 that you're not going to get against Alabama because there's no defensive back of Nick Saban's who's going to quit. You had the interception down in the red zone where Michigan potentially had an opportunity to make it a game and the wide receiver just gave up on it. And the Georgia defensive back didn't, and basically made, you know, it was almost like it was a fade to the defensive back because there wasn't a wide receiver in the area. Those sorts of mistakes are things you can't do against a Georgia team, right? So beyond the fact that you were out talented, I mean, you saw it with Aiden Hutchinson. There were a lot of clips going around afterwards of him getting blown off the ball. There was the wide receiver where Pickens shushed the sideline, went and blasted the defensive back and then shushed the sideline again. It's just a running play. So, I mean, Georgia has some swag. And I don't think that, you know, the good part about being 18, 19, 20 years old is you might get punched in the mouth, but most of the time you can forget that pretty quick, especially when you got sort of a month to get angry. You know, I think they're going to give Alabama a better game coming forward in this point. I think more than anything, the thing that this game had me thinking was, you know, Jim Harbaugh at the end of last year took a pay cut, and the shortened season in the Big Ten probably may have saved his job because it was so short that people couldn't get angry, at least not too angry, as opposed to at Florida, this season just seemed to continue to slog on and slog on and slog on. And so Dan Mullen wasn't able to survive it because there was always
a 7-game season this year.
there was always another game coming where it could get worse. And the interesting thing now is that Harbaugh bounces back, beats Ohio State. And what is he now? 1-5 against Ohio State, 1-6 against Ohio State. He gets that monkey off of his back. But Ohio State's not slowing down when it comes to recruiting, and Michigan isn't recruiting much better when you look at it. And so this is going to be a really interesting sort of comparison for Florida fans, because you do wonder, would Florida fans have accepted a playoff berth next year if Mullen had stayed? That obviously would have been enough to have him stay here. But, you know, is it almost a blessing in disguise that the Florida program fell apart this year and has allowed Billy Napier to come in? Whether Napier ends up being a savior or whether Napier ends up being a bust, the reality is that the chance he might be a savior. And I think what they're going to find at Michigan is that this is their ceiling, that Ohio State was down this year, that Michigan was able to take advantage of it. And when Michigan finally played a real team, it was like, oh, this is what you run into in the SEC. And, you know, this is as far as they're going to get. I mean, the Michigan State made it to the playoff, 5-6 years ago, got absolutely slaughtered, and then, goes back into the ether. And then Ohio State goes for 3 or 4 more years. And then all of a sudden Michigan makes it into the playoff. And I think that's kind of what you're looking for in the Big Ten. I'm not sure that would have been good enough at Florida. So I almost look at this as like, this is almost a mirror image of the recruiting. This is almost a mirror image of everything that we've been looking at from a Florida perspective. It's almost the same when you look at their recruiting averages, when you look at the number of 4 stars and 5 stars on the roster, when you look at the fact that Harbaugh has the NFL pedigree. And so everybody, from the standpoint of like being able to scheme, everybody thinks, okay, he's going to be able to scheme better than everybody else. And I'm curious to see what happens over the next 3 or 4 years, because I suspect that Ohio State's going to whip him probably 3 of those 4 years. And there are going to be some Michigan fans looking up going, God, it's been 10 years or 12 years he's been here, and we only made that one playoff year. And I think that's kind of what this game told us. This game told us that when you recruit at that level, even if you're an excellent coach, when you play a team like Georgia or you play a team like Alabama, you make a few mistakes, it's over. And they made way too many mistakes in order to pull that game out. That's for sure.
This might have convinced Harbaugh to take the Raiders job. That's a hot rumor going around.
Jaguars,
right
man, send it to the Jaguars.
Trent Baalke's there. It can't happen because Baalke's there, and Baalke's the one who fired him, got rid of him in San Francisco. Man, God, Jags. Anybody who's a Jags fan, I heard there's a rumor going around that they're telling people to dress like clowns at the Jags game Sunday to have a protest over Baalke. I'd like to see that. It'd be fun to watch. But anyway, finishing thoughts here. Perfect. I thought that's great analysis with the comparison to where the debate we had all season with Mullen in Florida, where last year you get past Georgia, but Georgia's a little bit down. And when you go up against Bama in the SEC title game, you can't get over that hump. And that's a little bit your ceiling. So even if you can get by a team that stands in the way a lot, it doesn't mean you're going to be the best team that year in college football, because if your talent is not there, the talent's not there. And UGA, Bama crushing recruiting. We're seeing them both in the college football final here. Well, quick look ahead to the game. Are we more confident? A lot of chatter around Stetson Bennett coming into the semifinal here. Thought he played very well in this game. Are we? I mean, there's really no other option at this point. It is what it is with Bennett going against Bama, but are we seeing a different scenario heading into this Bama game? They were up 10-0 in Georgia's defense, which I don't like doing. We don't like doing on this show very much, but Georgia's defense, they were winning 10-0 and very much in control early in the game.
Yeah. So I think I even wrote this in my recap of that game, is that it was that crossing route that they hit to Jamison Williams to make it 10-7 was like Rocky when he sees Drago bleeding, right? And once he saw him bleed, he's like, all right, we know how to make him bleed. And they picked on the defensive backs like crazy. And if there's one thing you want to criticize Michigan for, it's that, one, they didn't pick on the defensive backs. And two, even after one of the safeties went out for targeting, so they had a walk-on playing safety because they're so thin back there, Michigan wasn't able to take advantage. Jamison Williams can be able to take advantage of that. There are enough. There's enough talent. Jaleel Billingsley is going to help be able to take advantage of that sort of stuff. And as much as I'd like to say that Kirby is going to be able to get him guys ready for what he saw in the SEC championship game, I think that Saban's going to have something different for him. I think that they have smart enough players. I think they have good enough players that they will have wrinkles off of the things that they used in the SEC championship game. They're going to free people up. Yeah, they were up 10-0. But the problem with Stetson Bennett is not when they're up 10-0. The problem with Stetson Bennett is when they're down 20-10 or 20-13 and it's getting late. And when you have to throw, can he do it? And the interesting thing is like you mentioned earlier, Georgia has won every single game convincingly this year, to the point where I think Bennett's thrown like 13 or 14 passes in the fourth quarter, other than that SEC championship game. And they looked downright ordinary once he had to throw the ball in the second, third, and fourth quarter against Alabama. And therein lies the difference. Now, there were some lucky breaks that when Alabama's winning that game too. Bryce Young had a scramble there at the end of the half. He fumbled the ball. He was able to recover it, and then Alabama punched the ball in. If those things go Georgia's way, then that maybe is a different ball game. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons why those things are going Alabama's way is because Alabama is the more aggressive team when it comes to those sorts of things. It really does feel like Red Sox Yankees, where everybody in the Red Sox stadium is always waiting for the Aaron Boone home run. And then the Aaron Boone home run came, and they're like, oh, of course. So at some point, there may be an exhale, right? At some point, there may be the David Ortiz broken bat looper to center field after the stolen base by Brian Roberts that gives them the ability or Dave Roberts that allows them to score and sort of break the curse. But the reality is, I think it's going to take something like that. You think about like the Giants with the helmet catch against the Patriots. Think about all those different Super Bowls where something special had to happen for the upsets to actually occur. I think that's probably what you're looking for here. And it's funny because Georgia's had Alabama on the ropes a bunch. in the past. And whether it was Tua coming in for Jalen Hurts or whether it was Hurts coming in for Tua, or whether it was just taking that defense and absolutely running them off the field when they'd been a dominant force all year long, Alabama's always been able to find a way. We'll see. I mean, I think Georgia's the better team. I think when you look at all the stats, you look at the advanced stats, look at all the stuff, they're
favored.
Team.
They're favored. 3 points, right?
Yeah. I mean, Georgia's the better team. The reality is they're the better team, but there is one position on the field where Alabama has a major advantage, and it's at the quarterback position. And so, fair or not, Stetson Bennett may even play really, really well. But if Bryce Young plays the same way he did the other day in the SEC championship game, Alabama's probably going to win. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if your left tackle has the best game of his career and is the most talented guy on the field. What matters is if the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback goes for 450 yards. And can Stetson Bennett match Bryce Young throw for throw? Not unless Georgia's defense makes Bryce Young really uncomfortable. And so, look, I think if this one's where Georgia sort of stifles Alabama, gets a couple of breaks, is able to get up 13-3, is able to get up 17-10, something like that, and can kind of bleed the game, and you don't have to lean on Stetson Bennett, I think that's absolutely a game they can win. If they're down 24-10, forget it. Game's over.
Based on your Yankees-Red Sox comparison, we got another 45 years before Georgia beats Alabama if things play out in a similar fashion. But you're right. Georgia's going to beat Bama at some point. So in that nightmare scenario where you have to update your book to 2022 reasons to root for the Georgia Bull, 20 or 21 or 22, 21, I guess. Will, in the nightmare scenario that Georgia actually pulls this game out, what's that game look like for the Bulldogs? Are we looking at a high-scoring game? Or are we looking at that defense shutting Bryce Young down?
No, I think it's actually the running backs get really involved, especially in the passing game. I mean, if you looked at the game the other day,
James Cook was excellent.
It was James Cook catching bombs out of the backfield, having him isolated on linebackers. Those are things that, I talked to a couple of Georgia friends of mine who were just like, that Alabama game just seemed like it was completely out of sorts for the way this team has typically played. And you think about, Bennett, he's basically thrown for 10 yards an attempt almost all year. Again, he did it against Michigan, 30 attempts, 313 yards, 3 touchdowns. You look at that and you go, how would you guys call him a liability? But the problem is that when the only real team they played this year was Alabama. And we just saw what happened to Cincinnati when they played at Alabama, right? And it turns out that I do wonder whether Alabama in some of these games this year had some motivation problems, not necessarily ability problems. And then against Texas A&M, they kind of got caught. It was one of those things where they had a bunch of red zone turnovers and A&M was just sort of had enough confidence, and Calzada had the game of his life, and all of a sudden they're able to pick him off. But you don't get overconfident coming to the national championship game. And to be honest, I think Alabama being a 3-point underdog is like the best thing that could have ever happened for Nick Saban. He's feeding them that rat poison like all week long. Like, you guys just torched them by 24 points and they still think they're going to beat you. They still think they're going to beat you. And, Will Anderson's a pretty good player. And at some point, he's going to put a helmet in the back of Stetson Bennett. And, Bennett threw probably 4 balls that could have been pick sixes in that game, in the SEC championship game. They finally got one there in the third quarter to really sort of put the game away. I don't think they're going to miss the 2 or 3 that he puts out there again. And he did that against Florida too. He just threw awful passes into double coverage multiple times in the game against the Gators. And in the game against Michigan, he threw a couple of balls up there that the announcers were like, that's the thing with Stetson Bennett. He'll play great all game long. And then all of a sudden he'll just do something like that. And you're like, the thing is, you do that against Michigan and Michigan flubs it and doesn't catch it. The ball hits the ground harmlessly. You do that against Alabama, it goes the other way for 6. And, it did that in the SEC championship game. I suspect, if you ask me who's the better team is, I'd say Georgia. But if you ask me who's going to win, I ain't betting against Saban.
No, not at all. I think you look at this matchup too, and you think it should go either way with the amount of talent on both sides of the ball here. Stetson Bennett too. Stetson Bennett in a shootout versus Stetson Bennett playing with a lead might be a different quarterback in that game too. Maybe he won't force as many throws. Maybe he learned his lesson from a couple of the mistakes he made in that first Bama game. it'll be really interesting to see how these two prepare for each other. We see it all the time in the NFL with division rivals, and teams turn around playing each other in the playoffs after playing in the regular season. So it'll be really interesting to see some of the adjustments in this game and how they approach it on both sides. But I'm with you, Will. I can't bet against Saban. Let's move on to $1. Kirk Herbstreit making a lot of waves on College Game Day, New Year's Day, sitting in the Rose Bowl, talking about some of the bowl opt-outs. And he concluded his statements by saying this era player doesn't love football, comparing it to back when he played back in the day. And to tell you the truth, he got a lot of heat, but Desmond Howard and David Pollock, they sat there and backed him up pretty much. And Desmond Howard's like, that's what I was about to say. It was just a different mentality back then. They don't value the bowl games like we did. And to some extent, they're correct in that there wasn't a playoff system. There was a completely different system than there is today. So going to the Rose Bowl was the ultimate goal for an Ohio State player, for a Michigan player. It's not the ultimate goal anymore. Kirk came back and he said, I just want to clarify some of my comments from earlier today. This was on Twitter, New Year's Eve or New Year's night. He said, of course, some players love the game the same today as ever, but some don't. I'll always love the players of this game, and sorry if people thought I generalized or lumped them all into one category. That again, like that's why I think the comment was silly in the first place. Is you tell me every single player on your roster in 1992 loved football? It's probably a similar split. I think that this is an interesting debate because college football, in my mind, greatest sport on the planet, and it's got such a weird postseason. And it's the fault of the sport at the moment because there's this refusal to move on from the past. The BCS probably could have happened sooner if the Big Ten and Pac-10 got out of their Rose Bowl agreement, for example. They were stuck on wanting to stay with that Rose Bowl, and it took them a while to even agree to the BCS. But there's this weird need to adopt change while also minimizing change. So we must have a playoff system, but we must keep the bowl system intact. That's where you get this weird bubble that we're in right now. And to say that players look at the Rose Bowl like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson did with Ohio State, the top wide receivers, probably going to be first-round picks. They opt out of the Rose Bowl, and some older folks around Columbus can't wrap their heads around that because when Woody Hayes was around, the Rose Bowl was the thing. But you get a moment where on the Ohio State side on New Year's Day, where Jackson Smith in Jigba goes off and has 347 yards receiving on the day. That's a cool moment. That's a memorable moment in the bowl. The opt-outs created that moment in a way. So there's some negative to this, but it's a good opportunity for young players who maybe didn't get that type of attention during the season to really use this, what really serves as an exhibition game. Let's be real. It's an exhibition game that's heading into it can build momentum to head into the next season. I think it's important. I think bowl games are very important in terms of what they mean. They could mean something to the program going forward. If you use that as a jumping off point into a solid 2022 for CJ Stroud and that young receiving core, I think that's a great thing for the program. But I also understand why a player can opt out and preserve his draft status, as we saw when Matt Corral went down in the Sugar Bowl later that night. And I know his x-rays came back negative, but that could have been a total disaster for him and his draft stock.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to sort of, you were sort of going over the history of college football. I think you really need to go back to, it was 1984 that there was the ruling that sort of declared the NCAA's television restrictions illegal. And so you also have ESPN bursting on the scene at the time. And so the combination of the sports specific TV networks and then the rights that were available significantly increased the amount of money in the sport, but not by a ton. They really didn't know, I don't think, in 1985, 86, 87, how to really monetize. So when a guy like Kirk Herbstreit comes around in 1989, yeah, I could watch his games on TV. I remember watching Herbstreit at Ohio State when I was a kid. At the same time, the amount of money flowing into Ohio State from college football was just peanuts compared to what it is
TV. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
not only from TV, but I would say ticket sales, apparel, all that stuff. I mean, I think schools have become better and better and better at figuring out how to merchandise all this stuff. I mean, you think about like the donations you have to make for your seats just to get seats at all of these different places. And, was that set up back in 1989? I have no idea. But so that's the first thing, is that there's a lot more money in the system now than there was back then. But the other thing is I think this is almost an internet thing too, right? Is that sports, in a way that's unique because it's a collective experience, is something that's DVR proof. And so not only are sports a valuable entity and have been a valuable entity, and you talk about Kramer from the SEC sort of setting up all of the SEC championship game and the different TV contracts and all sorts of stuff like that. But they just went from, I think, making like $55 million a year for the SEC and on CBS to $300 million a year when they switched over to ESPN in 2024. So again, the numbers from a financial perspective are going up like a hockey stick, and the players aren't sharing any of that. Right. Or they're sharing very minimal amounts of that. Like, I mean, it's scholarship. And look, the third string left tackle probably isn't worth a scholarship, right? In terms of the total dollars that are spent on him. Like, they're distributing the money more evenly across the players because they have to give them each something there. But at the end of the day, $300 million for the SEC, you divide that by the 14 teams that are there, that's a big chunk of money that goes Florida's way every year. And the players don't see that. And so you get into this situation where, because the courts have to make the SEC or the NCAA or whoever divvy up that money, the players look at it and say, well, if you're going to hold on to the money until the courts tell you that you have to, then I'm going to exercise my rights and look out for number one when it comes to making money on the back end. Because yes, you gave me an opportunity and a platform, but in return for that, I made you a bunch of money. And so, especially when you think about first round draft picks, like, those guys made their universities a lot of money. Like, when you went into the Florida store and you bought a 15 jersey and it didn't say Tebow on the back, we all knew who you were buying that 15 jersey for. It wasn't some of the other guys who've worn 15. And it's the same thing with AR-15, right? Now, granted, these guys now have NIL licenses and those sorts of things where you can actually put names and things like that on the jerseys, but that's sort of in a unique phase. So I actually do think that what may happen is that some of the NIL money coming in from boosters may get connected to eligibility, right? And that you need to be eligible for these bowl games and we want you to play and those sorts of things. But I actually really worry about this, because you think about what they're doing when it comes to these bowl games is they've set up these playoffs, the Rose Bowl's held on, all that stuff that you said. And really all of the reasoning for those changes with retaining the history weren't really about retaining the history. They were about maximizing revenue, but they were about maximizing revenue in the short term. And that really makes me think of like,
but also maximizing revenue for a select group of people that run these bowl games too. And in college football, yes, but a lot of it's to appease these little groups of people that run these individual bowl games.
Sure, but even so, what I was about to say is that this reminds me of Major League Baseball, where I used to come home from school and there would be playoff games on at 3 p.m. on CBS, and you could see them locally. They were like, I could watch Roger Clemens play Oakland or something out in Oakland. And in fact, there was a game he got tossed for arguing with an umpire and he got thrown out before I got home from school. But basically I was watching baseball from the time I got home from school until the time I went to bed. And maybe I missed the end of the game, but I had watched just 5 or 6 hours before I went to bed. And now that doesn't happen. The games are at 9:00. And my son right now, even though he plays the sport, doesn't get to watch it. And the reason they do that is sound, right? Short term, they make way more money by having that 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and 11 p.m. window than they would if they had 2 games back to back. Now, there's more playoffs now, so you do get some day games and things like that. But when they just had the National League Championship Series and the American League Championship Series, and they hadn't expanded the wild card yet, and then they all of a sudden went to night games only. There's a whole generation of kids who never watched a playoff baseball, and regular season baseball is boring. Playoff baseball is exciting. And so they took the most exciting thing of their sport and distanced it from their fans. And that's my concern with the Bulls. It's not, these are meaningless. It's not the opt-outs, whatever. I mean, that stuff will happen. What I think my concern is that in exchange for short-term revenue, some of these entities specifically are going to alienate some of their fans. And bowl games are really, they're not for the people like Read and Reaction followers. Like, you're not there for people to sort of get away from having to talk politics when they got their uncle in the room who starts spouting something, whether it's left or right. It's like, hey, what's going on in this game over here, as everybody starts fighting. And it'll always serve that purpose. But look, I didn't watch any of the Pitt Michigan State game. Kenny Pickett wasn't playing. It wasn't a real game. And at the end of the day, that is going to impact things from the standpoint of, if kids don't think bowl games are meaningful, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids don't think they're meaningful and only think the playoff is the thing that's important, that's all they're going to pay attention to. And that generation of people who are growing up now in that age range, 15 or 20 years from now, will be the ones who determine how popular college football is. And I think it'll be more popular than Major League Baseball. But I look at it and I say, that's the same kind of mistake. Is you always have to invest in that next generation that's coming. And when you fail to do that, you don't experience the pain of that in day one. You experience the pain of that 15, 20, 25 years down the line. Now, does Bud Selig care that nobody gives a crap about baseball anymore? I don't know. He made a lot of money. He's in the Hall of Fame, right? But at the same time, that's what's happened to baseball. Baseball, in comparison to college football, NFL football, and the NBA, is a second-tier sport. It's better than hockey, but not as good as those other sports. And, that is a risk when you start diluting the quality of your product, because you're not willing to share the proceeds with everybody in an equal way, and not willing to more than anything, make short-term sacrifices from a monetary perspective in order to see the long-term picture.
Yeah, I mean, if you're younger and watching this bowl season, if go back and check out the highlights from that Purdue and Tennessee game last week at the Music City Bowl. I mean, that was bowl season growing up for me. I remember that just wild and crazy games that two teams from different conferences playing, going at it, that you don't usually see get together. Random matchup, play on a neutral field and have a great game like that. That's a solid idea of a bowl game right there. That stadium was sold out too up in Nashville. So both fan bases seemed excited about it. It's been a couple of years for Tennessee. Purdue doesn't usually get to go to like decent bowl games. So good on them for doing that. But so there's still some good examples out there of solid college football bowl games. But I mean, I'll tell you what too, I think the idea when you talk about expanding the playoff, they're continuing to appeal to these bowls, when in reality, I do like the idea. I love bowl games, but I also, if we're building it into the playoff, they get a lot of weight too, where it's like, I really feel like if we're going to expand the playoff system, we have to find a way to put some of these games on home fields in college stadiums. Cause I think it'd be better exposure for the local fans too. I think that'd be a great deal. Like, you're going to ask people to travel for 3 rounds, like you do in the NCAA tournament for basketball. I think that works with smaller arenas. But I remember a couple of years ago when Alabama and Clemson ended up playing a national title game out in San Francisco, that was ridiculous. So some of the setup here with college football, it definitely needs some evaluating going forward. But right now, it's not the love of the game, because all these kids that play these big time schools, they were all big time recruits, and they've been dealing with national attention during their whole recruiting process. So maybe some kids don't love the game, but I would say it's probably not a different percentage than it was in 1991 or 1989. I thought that was a ridiculous statement overall.
It is. I mean, you look at like Ricky Williams, who played football because it enabled him to do the things he wanted to do. But even he says he had to sort of smoke pot in order to cure his anxiety and things like that. We've had guys who didn't love the game, but were good at it for generations. And the reality is that when you can make millions of dollars doing something, even if you don't love it, you're going to go do it. At the same time, these players aren't stupid. And so you look at it and you go, oh, ESPN signed what level contract for this bowl game? And I'm getting what to go there? Like a nice watch and a couple of nights in a hotel. And, I think guys like Corral are great. I mean, guys like Damian Pierce and Kyrie Elam all went and decided to play, and that's fantastic, right? They get the opportunity to. They value it. I think all of us who are older would pay an awful lot of money to be able to go back and play the way we used to and have sort of that one last moment of glory. And so the fact that these guys took that opportunity, I think, says something. At the same time, I don't look at it as a black mark in terms of their ability to play in the NFL. And clearly, the NFL doesn't take that as a black mark. I think the perception was
they're getting the advice from the NFL to sit out.
Well, sure, but look, I think 15 or 20 years ago, if you sat out a bowl game, some scout in the NFL would have said, "Oh, he's soft. He doesn't want to play," and that would have impacted his draft status. And one of the benefits of analytics are that people like us can understand things and have opinions that's different than something that maybe a foreign player would have. But one of the downsides to analytics, I'm sure, is that the analytics guys are saying, look, it's a market inefficiency to take the guy that the scouts are saying is going to be a bust. Because look, when you pay him and when you dangle a paycheck in front of him, clearly he's going to be incentivized to play well because money is something that he cares about. Who cares if he loves the game? The question is, does he love the money enough to go through the torture that it takes to play the game? And that's a different question. And that's the question that they ask in the NFL more so than, does he love the game? Because a guy who loves the game, obviously, he'll play it for free. That's great. But that's not what happens in the NFL. You don't play it for free. They pay you. It's a job. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things that more open-minded front offices have brought to the table is it's no longer a question of just how tough are you. It's a question of, are you motivated by the right things? Will you do what's necessary in order to get that big payday? And quite honestly, the money's increased in the NFL in a similar way that it's increased in college, right? So you no longer go to the NFL just to make sort of generational changing money. Now you go to the NFL and can become like a mogul, right? Or you see it with LeBron, who's like a billionaire. And granted, basketball is a little bit different, but still, I mean, if you go to the NFL and you become Tom Brady or you become Peyton Manning, like your kids, your grandkids, and your great grandkids are never gonna have to work for the rest of their lives. And from the standpoint of, should I keep working for this? At the end of the day, I think most of these guys, and that's the other thing, is to get to this level, like these guys have all been getting up at 5 a.m. to lift weights for years. So the idea that anybody's really outworking somebody, I think in some cases on the margins, that's true. But I think what you're really seeing is that the people who are the most talented people end up rising to the top. And just like you would, you see somebody who's really, really, really smart, and when they're young, and 20 years later, you come back, they started a company. Those guys are millionaires. Like, at the end of the day, you sort of knew that person had good things in their future. And I think that's probably true when it comes to players as well. So yeah, I think I am fully on board with you that it's a ridiculous comment. I actually think the apology is just as ridiculous. Like, stand by it, man. Like, if you're gonna say it, you know what you're saying. Stand by it. And
on the other hand, though, I do understand the sentiment in the sense that he's frustrated about the issue. I do, like, I think he expressed it poorly, but I do think there is a frustration over the issue because I mean the Rose Bowl is a big deal. It's an awesome game. It really is. But to not understand why they're doing it and the fact that the kids are responding to something that's in the market because the game has this goofy setup where we're like, we want to keep this Rose Bowl thing because it's been around since like 1902, but we also want to have a playoff system. Well, that's what you're going to get. Like, as long as you don't compromise, if you got rid of all the bowl games and just made the playoffs set in bowl settings, expanded the playoffs and put it in bowl settings, everyone would play. So
look, if that statement came from Bill Snyder, I don't think anybody would have said a thing. The problem with it coming from Kirk Herbstreit is that he's worked for decades now for an organization that has been at the forefront of making the playoff the be-all, end-all of college football.
Right.
And the money that they've thrown at things has been one of the things that has changed it in a direction that he's now complaining about. And look, I don't begrudge Herbstreit taking the money.
That's a great point.
But at the end of the day, I think the thing that people got more upset with than the actual comment is that Herbstreit's a multimillionaire doing College Game Day for a sport with players who, if they get injured, will lose their opportunity at becoming multimillionaires. And so if Herbstreit wants to set up a fund to help support players who are injured during bowl games and champion that, I'm all for that. Because at the end of the day, if he finds a way to financially insulate those players so that they have no financial excuse to bail on the bowl game, then great. But to sit there and go, well, we're going to have our network roll out the college football rankings, the playoff rankings, and we're going to sit here and argue about Cincinnati versus everyone else for months at a time. And then when we get to the playoff, go, why do people only care about the playoff? Like, look, it's your fault. at least in some capacity, it's your fault. Now, granted, you're speaking to the ratings; those things drive the ratings, but that's the reality. Is you've decided to compromise the integrity of the game or the love of the game or whatever. Because, look, they could cover the Rose Bowl and only cover the Rose Bowl and not talk about the playoff and not talk about, Alabama and Michigan the day before at their halftime show, but they won't, because that has ratings impact. Getting Kirk Herbstreit's reaction to Michigan getting waxed by Georgia at halftime of that Rose Bowl gets more eyes than him talking about, the X's and O's of what's going on during that Rose Bowl, at the halftime, and what kind of adjustments need to be made. That's just the reality. And so, ESPN's following ratings, college football's following ratings. And so, I'm not sure that ESPN loves the game. ESPN loves the revenue that it brings. And so it's the exact same criticism right back at the network that Herbstreit's leveling at the players. So look, if you're going to say it, say it. That's the only, I don't mind the comment. I disagree with it, but I don't mind the comment. But the milk toast, well, I certainly didn't mean all players. It's like, yeah, okay. So only the ones
I meant the ones I meant.
Yeah, only the ones who opt out, which you're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah, that's such an old man get off my lawn take. First round picks in the NFL last year, Will. Last bit here, and then we'll wrap up. Trevor Lawrence, $36 million contract with the Jags, $24 million bonus. Let's go down to the 10th pick, Devontae Smith, $20 million. So it's already $60 million drop in contract, $12 million bonus, $12 million drop in signing bonus. That's 10 picks. You go down to the 20th pick, Kadarius Toney, $13.7 million contract, $7.3 million signing bonus, and all the way down, let's just jump down to 32. Joe Tryon for the Bucks, $11 million contract, $5 million signing bonus. So Joe Tryon about $16 million, whereas the top of the round, Trevor Lawrence is getting closer to 55 in that range, almost 60 million. So 60 million versus Joe Tryon there at about 15. So that's just the difference between picks 1 and picks 32. Matt Corral, if he had a serious knee injury, how many millions of dollars is that losing, as opposed to if he's, if it's just something that is going to heal up by the time the combine comes around and he can go full out for scouts and everything. I mean, it really is a big deal. So that's just in the first round. So these guys in 1989 weren't protecting $50 million investments. That wasn't the case in 1989. So if Chris Olave can get drafted at 12, where Micah Parsons had $17 million with nearly a $10 million signing bonus versus $14 million with a $7 million signing bonus, that's several $1 million just for a couple picks. So it might not seem like a big deal, 12 to 17, but it sure is in your checking account.
Well, so, I know he doesn't like being used as an example for this because I heard him say this, but I'm not saying that Jake Butt made the wrong decision playing in the Orange Bowl in 2016, but Butt was a tight end, wins the Mackey Award, tight end for Michigan, and probably projected to be a second round pick in the 17 draft.
And this was the first year there were opt-outs, right? With Fournette and McCaffrey.
Yeah, I think so. Right. So he ends up going in the 5th round to the Broncos. He gets a $500,000 payout for insurance. So he did get some money from the insurance. And then he signed a $2.7 million contract with a $300,000 signing bonus. But then he ended up on injured reserve, and he ended up having ACL issues basically his entire career and had to retire from the NFL. Now, look, Butt valued his teammates. He's basically said, don't use me as an example. But the reason I'm using him as an example is not because I think he made the wrong decision or because I don't respect the decision that he made or anything like that. It's to point out that is the ramifications, right? Like a second round draft pick has a signing bonus over $1 million and has a contract that's probably in the $10, $11 million over the course of the contract, depending upon where you're taken in the second round. So it's a lot of money. And the reality is that I don't know what Jake Butt's situation is when he was a kid. Maybe he's got parents who did a great job of raising him, and he's very, very successful. There are guys who come from backgrounds where that's not possible, right? There are guys who, would you put $1 million in their pocket, like that's their best shot at having that sort of revenue for their family based on, let's be honest, not everybody who goes to college and plays college football would have gone to college otherwise. And so are they equipped to take advantage of the education that they're getting? Not everybody is. And so if you have an opportunity to make $4 or $5, $6 million, and instead you make 500 grand, that's a big deal. And if it's a big deal to you, I think it makes sense for somebody to opt out. So, again, I think the money is significant, and the money at the top end of the draft is significant, and the drop off, as you mentioned, is significant. And so when you start getting all of those things rolled in together, it's perfectly understandable that somebody would opt out. It also means that it's understandable if somebody loves playing football and they just want one more game with their teammates and they feel like they owe it to their teammates and they play. I'm not going to criticize somebody for doing that. I think it's an honorable thing, but it's not doing the right thing. And I think that's sort of the thing that sort of got my antenna up in that Ole Miss game, where you had Tessitore talking about Corral doing things the right way, right? There's a difference between he made a decision that is his decision, and I'm glad he got to make his decision. And then he got injured, but thankfully the injury is not serious. He'll get drafted where he would have gotten drafted. But he's not some martyr for doing that. It's not like he made the right decision. He made the right decision for him. And there are other people out there who made the right decisions for themselves. And in a world where college football has decided not that they don't have a duty to take care of their players if they get injured in bowl games, then I don't know that the players have a duty to continue on in these games, especially when you consider all the coaches who bailed on the bowl games. I mean, heck, you think about 20 years ago, the other thing that was left unsaid in that conversation is 20 years ago, you had Bobby Bowden versus Tom Osborne. And yeah, you had guys like Warwick Dunn, and you had guys like Charlie Ward, and you had guys like Tommy Frazier and all that sort of stuff, right? But when I think about Nebraska and I think about Florida State in those eras, I don't necessarily go player first. I go to the coaches. And one of the things that you saw a lot more stability on 20, 30 years ago was coaches as well. And so, the reality is that the universities have gotten a lot quicker at pulling the trigger on getting rid of coaches. And the coaches have gotten a lot quicker to pull the trigger to move someplace else. And so what a surprise that the players have learned from this and have decided that they're going to do it as well. Again, I think it's one of those things, like I mentioned, Herb Street, from the standpoint of his network being responsible for some of these things. I think you could say the same thing about the universities and the same thing about the coaches. Like if coaches are going to be mercenaries and move around all over the place, I don't know why you get mad at players who are doing it. And I think that sort of goes back to what we were saying about Louisiana earlier, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Billy Napier decides to leave and all these players committed to Billy Napier. So I don't know how you could be mad at Louisiana that these players decide they want to go someplace else, whether it's Florida or someplace else. That's the nature of college sports at this point. You either like it or you don't. If you don't like it, there are probably some steps you can take to make it better if you're in a position of power. But I don't think the guys in a position of power really care because the TV ratings keep going up.
I think it's still evolving too. I don't think I think the situation is going to look different 5 years from now. It's going to look different 10 years from now. And I think these are major steps that were talked about for years and years and years that are finally coming into reality. I mean, think about when we were kids, Will, in the 90s, the playoffs, that was a dream. When's that going to ever happen? Playoff in college football. And here we are talking about expansion into 12.
Heck, when I was growing up, we couldn't even get the best teams to play. You had Michigan playing Washington State in the Rose Bowl, while you had I think Oklahoma playing, USC in the Orange Bowl or something like that. And then they each win and you end up with a co-national championship. Can you imagine a co-national championship? What the heck is that?
Yeah, not adequate. And that's what people who are romanticizing the BCS, let's pump the brakes on that too, because that wasn't so good either. There people are legitimately calling for a return to the BCS. I'm like, hey, I know there was a couple of good title games. Everyone wants to talk about Texas and USC, but there was a lot of a lot of strife in that era too. Talk to Auburn in 2004, Miami in 2000, or I think it was in 2000 when FSU went over them, despite losing to Miami.
Well, even that year where Miami played Nebraska, and Nebraska was just awful, and we knew they
didn't even win the Big 12, right? It was awful. Yeah. Anyway,
hey, all I know is if we really want parity and we really want change in college football, we need somebody to figure out how to get Saban caught, but for some sort of violation. Because until he's gone,
who actually wants parity in college football? We want to dominate. Florida wants to dominate, right? We just all want to be what Alabama is doing, right?
Well, I
don't want a parity.
So dynasties are good so long as there's a rival. And to be honest, I hope Alabama waxes Georgia, but I think it might be good for college football if Georgia beats Alabama. And just from the standpoint of, I think it was good for college football when Clemson won a few years ago. And then Clemson sort of had their cycle and has now gone down. I think it's, you mentioned the 3 to 5 to 7 year cycles. I think that's a good thing. I think now that we're at like year 12 of Saban just dominating everything, this is where it starts to get a little bit where you start asking, is this the 27 Yankees? Then again, baseball is the most popular sport the minute the 27 Yankees were done. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
I can live through another year of the Saban tyranny, and then we'll let Billy be the next guy.
All right, there you go. We'll take it.
All right, long episode, everybody, but lots to talk about. Busy week, college football. We have to really enjoy the busy weeks of college football because in another month or so, we'll be scraping the barrel for content here. We'll find it. Enjoy this while we got it.
There's always something going on. Like you said, I mean, I feel like we had 4 pretty good topics tonight. And we still got the bonus episode tonight's going to be what did we think about Utah in that Rose Bowl? So, certainly go over to Patreon and check that out if you want to hear what we have to say about that. There's always something going on in Gator Nation. There's always something to talk about. So we'll be around all off season because there's going to be more stuff to talk about next week, I'm sure.
Utah Utes coming into Gainesville to open the season 2022. So that was definitely a lot of fun watching that game. Great Rose Bowl game. That was a really fun game to watch. All right. Will, good episode. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for subscribing. Please share it with a friend if they haven't subscribed yet. And we're trying to pump those numbers up over the season. And we appreciate all the support throughout this season. Have a great day and go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.